Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Welcome to Unless, the podcast, inspired by that Dr. Seuss quote from the Lorax that reminds us of the role we can each play in making the world a better place. Join Dr. Hemma Lomax and her guests as they share incredible stories of being moved to decisive action and perseverance, leading to tangible impact at scale. This podcast is a production of Corporate Compliance Insights.
Hello and welcome to Unless the podcast. I am Dr. Hemma Lomax and today my guest is John Graham. He is someone who has made a career and a life out of sticking his neck out. His story reads like an epic adventure. At 16, he shipped out on a freighter to Asia. At 19, he was hitchhiking through the Algerian Revolution. At 20, he climbed the unclimbed South Wall of Denali. He's been a war correspondent, a US Foreign Service officer in some of the world's most dangerous flashpoints, and a key player at the United Nations during the fight to end apartheid. But a near-death experience in a typhoon at sea became a turning point, steering him from adrenaline to impact. For the past 4 decades, John has helped lead the Giraffe Heroes Project, honouring and equipping people across the globe who stick their necks out for the common good. He's worked in war zones, classrooms and parliaments, expanding the movement to countries from Nepal to Zimbabwe. And now, as a creator of the viral Badass Grandad series on TikTok, he's bringing stories of courage to a whole new generation. John Graham is here to talk about finding your moment to act, the courage to step out of your comfort zone, and how each of us, yes, including you, can be a hero in our own communities. John, a warm welcome to Unless the podcast.
Wow, thank you, Emma. That was a marvelous introduction. I really enjoyed it. My bumper sticker is, at this point, age 83, I'm lucky to be alive.
Oh, well, I understand that deeply, having read some of your works. We're going to get into that for our audience, but you are lucky to be alive because you've taken a number of risks in your life. We're going to talk about risk-taking, I think. That's one of your themes. But we're very lucky that you're alive so that we can hear all of your stories. And one of the most exciting guests we're going to have on Unless, I know that's going to be fun today. Let's dig in. I normally ask my guests to introduce themselves, but I feel like if I ask you to do that, I'll need hours and hours for you to tell us all the different stories. But may I ask you, John, just briefly to tell us how you describe yourself today and who you are?
Describe myself today? I think quite a bit different than when I was a young man, and we'll get into that, I guess. But I describe myself now as completely dedicated toward creating a better world. My whole first half of my life, I was moving in more or less the opposite direction. And for the last 40 years, especially with my work with the Giraffe Heroes Project with my partner, Ann Medlock, we have done a lot of things. I've written 5 books. We manage the Giraffe Heroes Project, which, by the way, is not about giraffes. It's about telling the stories of heroes, telling the stories of people sticking their necks out, hence the metaphor, and in that way inspiring others to stick their necks out too. And in the course of that, we've developed all kinds of ways of coaching people to become citizen activists, tackling whatever problems they see in their communities, in their nations, or global problems like global warming, for example. And so we are storytellers, basically. And that's what I guess the biggest single way of describing my life today is as a storyteller, looking to help people find the meaning of their life through some kind of service, some kind of giving back, some kind of getting involved in solving the tough public problems that concern them most.
Yes. And this is why we were destined to meet, because I do believe very much in the power of storytelling, but also in this idea of inspiring people to find the power within and their legacy. And so you've done that magnificently, John. Let's get into that. Your life was a series of bold leaps, from what I can tell. I've read a lot about you from what you've published online and your book, Quest, your memoir. So we mentioned Asia at 16. I think you won an essay competition and won a 6-week journey on a freighter. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, good. Yes, that's true. I was just 16. I was 16 years old, and I grew up, by the way, in Tacoma, Washington, which is a very placid, small city in America. Most of your readers may know. Most of your viewers may know. And nothing ever happened there, and nothing ever happened in my family. And I was expected to go to the University of Washington, come back, marry the girl next door, or start work for somebody, a friend of my father's perhaps, and that that would be it. I mean, that's what everybody else did. And then came this remarkable event. It's true that it began with my winning an essay contest, but the prize in the essay contest was a trip as a passenger on a freighter. But it turned out that the shipping company had mistakenly booked up all their passenger space. So they told my mother, well, we can take John, but he'll have to come as a member of the crew. Well, we'll give him a soft job. He won't have to do much work, but he'll be officially a member of the crew. So my mother said, oh, wait a minute. That means he'll be on the ship with 50 or 60 really tough guys with muscles and tattoos. I don't know. He's only 16 years old. So anyway, thank God my mother let me go. And I found myself on this freighter heading for the Far East. And again, I was completely clueless. I mean, I grew up in this very safe place, and by the way, I was badly bullied as a youngster, as a teenager, and therefore in great need of male role models. I wanted to be tough. I wanted to some way to deal with the bullies in my life, and it wasn't through my own father. I mean, I loved the guy, but my father was bullied himself, and he kept getting kicked around by stronger, tougher men. So he wasn't the model I needed, and I was desperate for a model of manhood, and I couldn't find it at home. But all of a sudden, I was on this ship with these 50 or 60 really tough guys. Now, mind you, ships in that era, they weren't container ships. They were big ships run by by crews of tough guys that loaded stuff in and out of the holds and went from one port to the other. Anyway, the first night out on that ship, one of the crewmen out on deck starts making sexually inappropriate moves on me. And another crewman, a big black guy, we must have weighed 250 pounds, I guess. His name was Roy. He grabbed this first guy, slammed him up against the bulkhead, beat the shit out of him, and let loose with the most incredibly wonderful stream of cussing I'd ever heard in my life. Now, I'd never seen physical violence. I'd never heard cussing like that. And all of a sudden, I realized that this is what real men were supposed to do. So I went down to my cabin that night and I practiced beating somebody up against the bulkhead and cussing like Roy. And I had a whole new model of manhood. And sure enough, that crew, those crew, they were great. They realized right off that coming from my background, I had a whole lot of lessons to learn about life that I was never going to get in Tacoma, Washington. And they determined to teach me these life lessons. Well, this is a family station, so I won't go into detail on what those lessons were, but you can imagine 6 weeks on the Orient with these guys, everything from barroom brawls to whatever. But anyway, the thing was, all of a sudden, I was out in the world. It was huge, colorful, exciting. I'd never seen anything like that. And it triggered something in me that has never left me. A yen for adventure, a yen for that color, a yen for passionate life. All that happened in a couple of months that summer. And when I came back, I wanted to go back out to sea, but my parents, of course, wisely said, "No, damn it, you're going to at least finish high school." So I did that, and then, as you pointed out, I never lost that yen, that huge revelation about this bigger, wider world. And so a few years later, I was hitchhiking in Europe. And I saw from a newspaper in the youth hostel in Switzerland that there was a war going on just south in a place called Algeria, where a bunch of rebels were trying to wrest control of the country from the French colonialists. And I said, well, that's cool. I've never been in a war before. I got to go down and see that. So I hitchhiked down through Morocco, and I crossed the border into Algeria. And I at least was smart enough to stick an American flag on my shirt so that the rebels would see that I wasn't a Frenchman and shoot me. I shouldn't have worried because the rebels were really friendly. They would even stop cars going in my direction at gunpoint, tell the driver to take me where I wanted to go. And so I went through Algeria. I stayed with French legionnaires who were just like Roy on that freighter. They were big, tough guys with tattoos and muscles. Oh, I wanted so much to be like them. So much to be like them. And so I spent a good part of that summer in Algeria. You mentioned earlier, or when we were talking earlier, that in some of the pain and suffering I saw in Algeria, I didn't know what to do with because I'd never seen so much of real life before. And I met some people that were dying or they knew they were going to die because there are a few remaining Frenchmen, for example, for sure were going to get killed before this war was over. And I didn't know what to do with the pain that they felt. Because by that point, I was beginning to, as I put it, I was beginning to nail a piece of heavy plywood over my heart because I thought then that real men didn't cry. Real men didn't do that. Women did that. And then if I wanted to be big and tough, I had to suppress my emotions. And that's what I did. I decided that my literary heroes were all the great heroes of history, and my movie heroes were people like John Wayne, and that's who I wanted to be. I came back, I went to college, I rode crew, and so I gained 35 pounds of muscle, and I finally had a body that could do these difficult things. I became a big, tough guy myself, and tough enough, for example, that I joined six others in making that mountain climb up the fearsome face in Alaska. A mountain face, by the way, bigger and higher than anything, top to bottom, on Mount Everest. And it's a climb so friggin' dangerous that no one's even tried to do it since. But we made the first ascent, and I came out of that. We had one close call after the other, but we walked away from all of them. And I became convinced then that not only could I live a life of real adventure, but I could do so without getting hurt. I had one adventure after the other. Like you say, I can't go through them all, but they were dangerous adventures, and I kept walking away from them. I finally realized after college that was what my life was about. So I then hitchhiked around the world, not across the oceans, of course, but I hitchhiked basically around the world and ended up in Australia. And then I realized then that I wasn't personally wealthy. So if I wanted to continue a life of adventure after this year of hitchhiking around the world, I had to also make a living. And I realized that maybe the best place to do that was in the Foreign Service, wearing a coat and tie in embassies in Paris and London, but the kind of the Foreign Service that dealt with wars and revolutions, all this tough and violent stuff. So I got into the U.S. Foreign Service, and sure enough, my second post was in Libya, just as Muammar Gaddafi was taking power in the revolution in 1969. And I loved it. Everybody else at the embassy, Hemma, was freaking out, but not me. The first time I saw cars burning in the streets and rock throwing mobs, I loved it. I just absolutely loved it. I was in my element. And of course, so in the Foreign Service, I did very well. So the Foreign Service kept promoting me because I was so good at dealing with tough, violent situations. So I said, fine, send me to the toughest, most violent place you've got. I want it all. And they said, okay, we'll send you to Vietnam, the war in Vietnam. And not only that, but we'll send you to the most dangerous spot we've got, which is as advisor to the mayor of Hue, which was a small city in the northern part of what was then South Vietnam. But it was just 50 miles south of the DMZ, the line then dividing North and South Vietnam. And it sure as hell was dangerous. And in 1971, the North Vietnamese tried to overrun Hue and overrun the country. They didn't succeed for 3 more years, as we know, but they tried hard in something called the Easter Offensive. And they all but surrounded Hue. I had no protection because by then American troops had left Vietnam under the troop withdrawal agreement. So it was just a couple of us civilians in this city, and it was being surrounded by the North Vietnamese, and it looked like it was going to be overrun, and mostly because the South Vietnamese army was poorly led and disintegrated and was fleeing south, and a lot of deserters from that South Vietnamese army were scared out of their wits, and so they created an enormous security risk in Hue. They were raping and looting and basically making life extremely dangerous even before the North Vietnamese got down there. We were fighting the South Vietnamese. So I decided that the only way to deal with this was to set up a firing squad to start shooting some of these deserters from the South Vietnamese army. I didn't know if it would help or not. But that's what we did. And I realized that in the middle of all this, I mean, you can imagine the artillery was crashing and booming. The NVA or North Vietnamese tanks were only 6 miles from the city gates. The marketplace had been burned, so there was a pall of black smoke hanging over the city. It was like a scene from Kafka. It was incredible. And all of a sudden it hit me. I had just set up this firing squad, even though I knew that the deserters that were causing all the trouble were farm boys, probably dragooned off their paddies the month before, scared out of their wits, drunk, causing all this trouble. And now I was shooting them. And it occurred to me that my home was 8,000 miles away. I didn't care about this damn war. I didn't even care who won. I was there for the adventure, for the adrenaline rush. And I was there in a completely amoral state. I knew the war was lost, by the way. It was clear from the moment I set foot in Vietnam that it was a stupid, unwinnable, unjust war. But again, like I say, I didn't care. And now these farm boys were getting killed or would be getting killed. And I just remember putting my head down because I finally realized how shallow my life had become. This was not the innocent adventuring of a 16-year-old. I was now 29 years old. I was an adult. And I was living a life that was incredibly shallow. All I cared about was the next adventure. I didn't give a damn about the suffering that I had seen in the world, about other people, about community, none of that. And all of a sudden I did. Luckily, the next morning, the skies cleared and American fighter jets from carriers off the coast blasted the North Vietnamese that were surrounding Hue, and my life was once again spared. I came back to California, and State Department sent me to Stanford for a year, mostly to deal with what was not what we would now call PTSD, because I was there. Every moment I was there for a year and a half, could have been the last moment. I was a prime target for assassination in Hue. But mostly it wasn't PTSD. It was getting my life back, of learning how to be a human being and developing entirely new methods of manhood and models for manhood, not just seamen on ships or French foreign legionnaires or John Wayne, but who the hell was I? I had this plywood nailed against my chest and I had to rip it off. And once I did that, I did discover that there was a kinder, gentler John Graham there. And I had people scream that at me, and I finally began to get it. And so I began restructuring a life. Restructure, that's the only way I can put it. I mean, I began, and the State Department, they didn't do it on purpose, but they really helped me by sending me to the United Nations, where, of course, there was a whole lot of views of world suffering and need. And they put me in charge of Africa and indeed for most of the third world policies up there. Why would they do that to a mid-level officer? Well, because the U.S. didn't really give a damn about the third world and the black and brown peoples of the world. All they cared about was our strategic competition with the then Soviet Union. This was the middle of the Cold War. So I had enormous amounts of leeway and power at the United Nations. And I realized that I could use that power to do good in the world, to help work for peace and justice in the world. And I started doing that. And it totally, I got so inflamed with that as my life began to turn around. I was as passionate for that as I'd ever been passionate for physical adventure. The key point, I think you might have mentioned, was that I helped end apartheid, which I'm very proud of. And I did that by double-crossing my own government. I took enormous risks to help end apartheid because the key to ending it was stopping the flow of guns to the South African military and police. In other words, an arms embargo. But my own government didn't want to do that because there was so much money to be made shipping guns to the South African military and police, and Congress was looking the other way, and Jimmy Carter was helpless to prevent it. I did all kinds of stuff, including showing African diplomats at the United Nations classified documents of who was shipping the guns and where the PowerPoints were, so they could focus their political leverage against my own government. I even saw a message that my Secretary of State, my boss, had gotten from an African foreign minister, just bitterly accusing the U.S. of hypocrisy, of mouthing all the right things about peace and justice, and then doing everything it could to make sure that it kept selling guns to the South African military and police, which were used, of course, to kill blacks and to control blacks. And in the middle of that message, I saw two sentences that I myself had written a month before, given to my colleagues at the United Nations. He'd given them to his boss over in Africa, and they'd come rocketing back in a message to my boss. So, like I say, I could have been fired, certainly. I could have been put in jail. I took enormous risks to do that, but once I realized what I could do, and yes, the UN did pass an arms embargo in the spring of 1971. No, the spring of 1980. Where am I now? Yeah, the spring of 1980, and that embargo helped end apartheid. And I feel good about that, like I say. But then I was in on a roll, and the State Department was moving nowhere near fast enough. Jimmy Carter wasn't moving fast enough, and certainly Ronald Reagan, the new president, wasn't. So I had to get out, and so I left a very promising career, left the Foreign Service, left the United Nations, and thought that I could change the world with these wonderful new ideals by giving wonderful speeches, because I'd always had a good gift of gab, you know. And so I started doing that, and I was preaching to peace groups and stuff, and people were not many people were coming. So I was getting a little distraught. Not only that, I was getting broke. A friend of mine says, "Hey, you're broke. You need some money. Go lecture on cruise ships." I said, "What? Oh, yeah. You can make a lot of money on these fancy cruise ships just by giving a speech on any. They don't care what you talk about." So I got a job on a cruise ship and going from Vancouver to the Far East. And I got to take my then 13-year-old daughter with me, and we set out. And sure enough, I had to give a couple lectures on U.S. foreign policy or whatever. In point of fact, I realized that half my job was waltzing little blue-haired ladies around the dance floor. That's why they told me to bring a tuxedo.
Love it.
Anyway, 3 days off the coast of Vancouver, that damn ship catches fire and starts to sink. We're 140 miles off the Alaskan coast in the middle of the North, not in the middle, but heading toward the middle of the North Pacific, and the ship is catching fire. And I find myself in a lifeboat with Mallory. And not only that, but a typhoon is coming on. And we're so far from shore, it takes a while. But finally, helicopters start to arrive. And I see my daughter, Mallory, rescued by a helicopter. They lower a chair from a helicopter, and one person at a time gets into that chair, gets strapped in, hauled up to the helicopter, and then taken to, in this case, a big oil tanker. It answered the SOS. I see Mallory rescued. But now the typhoon is coming on, and the helicopters can't fly anymore. And it's now late in the afternoon, and we're in the middle of this typhoon. And that typhoon is sending the waves 30 feet high, which means that we're going up and down 60 feet in this little cockle shell of a lifeboat. And the winds are more than 60 knots, and we're all dying of hypothermia because we had never been warned that this would happen, so none of us had warm clothes. And I realized that we had maybe 5 or 6 hours to live before we would die of hypothermia, die of the cold. After all, it's October, Gulf of Alaska. The key thing is light. The only chance of rescuing us now was Coast Guard cutters, small ships, because the helicopters couldn't fly anymore. It was suicidal to fly a helicopter in that weather. So these Coast Guard cutters were frantically searching this storm, even though the visibility was now down to maybe 100 yards. The odds were really slim it would find us. But the key thing was the dark. And once it got dark, there was no hope whatsoever of finding us because we had no lights, no flares, no radio, of course, nothing, no reflectors. So we had maybe an hour to live, the last bits of light. And then we were done. They would find our bodies, but we would probably be thrown out of the lifeboat by the end of the morning. So anyway, I'd always walked away, as I think I said, from these close calls. But this time it looked like I was not going to walk away, that I was going to die because the odds were now getting infinitesimally small. This Coast Guard cutter would find us. It was getting dark. So I remember I wasn't a prayerful person. I wasn't a religious person at all. But I'm telling you that I'm sure your viewers will realize in a case like that, one is led to do something to try to connect to an absolute, a God or something out there. So I did that, and I said, I don't. But my prayer turned into an angry bleat because I turned up and I started talking to God. And I said, look, wait a minute. I understand that the first part of my life wasn't so great in terms of helping other people. But the second part of my life, hey, aren't I doing your work, making the world a better place? I mean, I did help end apartheid, And God said, well, yeah, you did. But if you get out of this mess, you're going to go lecture on another cruise ship because it's very copacetic. You're being well paid. You're on cruise ships and stuff. You're losing the ideals that you exhibited at the United Nations. So you have a choice to make. Either get serious about your ideals of helping save the world, and that's one thing. But if you're not serious about those ideals, you might as well die out here because the rest of your life just won't be worth living. That was it. I was presented with that stark choice. Now, there were 7 other people on that lifeboat at that point. 7. There were 8 of us altogether. None of the other 7 heard a word, of course. Maybe all I heard was the wind. I don't know, but I heard this voice, and it made that deal. And I looked up into the storm, and I just said, "Yes, okay, okay." And in that instant, and here's where your viewers are just going to say, "Oh no." I swear him, in that very instant, the Coast Guard cutter Boutwell comes crashing through this wild storm, and the lookout, the boat would have cut us in two had the lookout not seen us. And we get rescued, and I go back to New York, and I keep my promise. I never looked back from that promise, and so that began the second half of my life, and it began very quickly because I had just at that moment had met a woman named Anne Medlock, a remarkable writer, single mother writer, editor in New York City, who had started the Giraffe Heroes Project because she was fed up with all the bad news that media was feeding us. And she knew there were lots of good people doing great things in New York City or anyplace else, but no one was telling their stories. So she, Anne Medlock, was going to start telling the stories of the world's heroes. And in doing so, inspire others to be heroic. I mean, it's very simple-minded strategy, but a very old strategy. I mean, I suspect Neanderthals were doing the same damn thing around their campfires. You want your culture to be heroic, you don't preach at them. You tell them the stories of people who are already heroic. You tell them the stories of heroes, and Anne understood that. So it was that kind of storytelling. And what she was doing caught on immediately. I mean, within a few years, there was a nice story on what she was doing in the New York Times. And I must admit, to my great shame, in the beginning, I thought it was lightweight. I mean, storytelling, this is a tough world out there. My God, I mean, it was the Soviet Union and this and the wars and revolutions. And then I fell in love with Anne, and everything she was doing became so much more important. More to the point, though, it wasn't just being in love with her, and now we've been married 44 years. It was understanding that she was absolutely right about storytelling. My lecturing to peace groups was going nowhere, but the Giraffe Heroes Project was growing like topsy. It was just, and so I helped Anne, and we started finding heroes all over the world and interviewing those we could reach and create. And then Anne would go and around stage doors in New York and get stars, movie stars, stage stars, people like John Venderer, for example, to narrate the voiceover. And she would combine the voiceover with the voice of the giraffe hero, and create little 3-4 minute, 5 minute little segments, put them on vinyl disc. I don't know how many of your viewers are old enough to know what a vinyl disc is, but it goes round and round on a turntable, and music comes out or whatever. So he would send these vinyl discs off to small radio stations, and some of them would play them, some wouldn't, but it began to grow. And we would also send the stories out with faxes, because this is before social media, right? And it grew and grew and grew. And that's the Giraffe Heroes Project. And we've been doing that now since 1982. So it's been about 43 years. And it's been a great success. I think we've inspired millions of people to take action, to become heroic. We've written curricula that spans the grades from kindergarten through high school. I've written 5 books, all on the themes of courage, using courage, finding meaning, in order to make your world a better place. Before COVID, I was running all around the world giving speeches to that effect on those same themes. And now, especially since I'm 83, and I really don't want to crawl into the airplanes anymore. At my height, I'm 6.5 feet tall. So I found that I've gotten pretty good at using social media. I'm trying all kinds of things, including I think you mentioned it, a series aimed at young people called Badass Granddad. I just love doing it. It's only 3-minute segments because these kids on their phones and tablets, they don't have much attention span of a peanut. So these 3-minute segments. In half of that segment, I tell some adventure story. In the second half, I draw some life lesson from that adventure story about courage, about perseverance, about whatever lesson it is that fits that story. And I'm loving doing it and getting a fabulous response, especially from young people. But now I've talked too much. But you asked.
No, you've said it all, but there's so much more to ask you, John. So let's dig in a little bit because I mean, I want to just pause in reverence for the stories. I mean, there's so much in there. You couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, that journey that you've described is something else. And I think I want to unpack that a little bit. I almost want to go back to. I want to speak a bit more about the Giraffe Heroes Project and Badass Grandpa, but we'll come to that. Before we do that, let's go back to that boy that wrote the essay.
Yes.
Now, I've heard you say courage isn't the absence of fear, it's what you do with it.
Yes.
And I love that. I have a similar phraseology when I say courage isn't the absence of fear, it's knowing that something else is more important than your fear.
Good.
So I ask you, John, what was so important to you then that you would continue to seek out thrills despite what, obviously scary things that you did, whether it's war or climbing the Mount Denali, things that weren't done. What was it that was more important to you than your fear at that time?
It's pretty shallow. Standing up to the bullies. I mean, the reason I got consumed in all that was I was desperate to become a real man, whatever that meant. I didn't know what a real man was until I met this tough guy on board that ship on the French Legionnaires and started watching John Wayne movies, and then became a hero, tough guy myself, doing all kinds of tough guy things. And so what motivated me was adrenaline. Adrenaline was my drug of choice. And shallow or not, that's what it was. And then when the turnaround came, I realized first of all, I realized fairly early on that there was nothing more important for any human being that their life be meaningful. That is to say, they look in the mirror in the morning, you look in the mirror in the morning, and what looks back at you, you want to know means something. That you're not on this planet just to mark time, to be like a fancy Swiss watch with no hands. You're here for a purpose. Everybody thinks that. Even the real bastards think that. Okay, you're here for a purpose. So, in the beginning of my life, my purpose was adventure. I have a lot of people, friends and acquaintances today, and their purpose, at least for a time, is making a whole lot of money or being powerful. And I've discovered from my own life, beginning with that at the United Nations, that the most stable source of meaning in life is some kind of service. And I'm quick to say, because I talk to a lot of business audiences, that I'm not talking about becoming Mother Teresa. I'm not talking about sackcloth and ashes. If you produce a good product, sell it for a fair price, fair labor conditions, good environmental quality decisions, good neighbor to the communities in which you work, that's a service. A neurosurgeon is of service. An opera singer can be of service. There's ways to find what's your service. All you have to do is think about it. And where do your skills and your resources and contacts lead you? And then to find some way that makes the world a better place. Sure, be a business person, be a barber, be a whatever, but find service in that. And that turned me around. And so I would say now that the prime mover in my life, no question about it, is reinforcing the meaning of my life by finding new and better ways to serve. I mean, I think finding meaning is this, to put it in words that you probably understand as a compliance manager, that what's really that the idea of finding meaning is the strategy for my life. Service is the tactics.
Uh-huh. I
I
love
keep
that.
finding new and better tactics to be of service. This badass granddad is a tactic I just invented 6 months ago. Writing books, another tactic. My blog pieces, all the stuff I do with the Giraffe Heroes Project. These are tactics, and I'm constantly looking for new ones. But it all feeds back into the uber strategy of finding meaning.
Yeah.
And I am quick to say, although I'm very cautious about telling anyone what to do with their lives, I will say one thing for sure I know, and that is that everybody seeks meaning in their life. And you may find it in really funny places for a while, but sooner or later, you'll discover that meaning comes from some kind of giving back.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So insightful. And look, we've unpacked a little bit there of, like you said, strategy, tactics, and even your early motivations. I just want one observation on that before we talk about the power and the agency to do these things. On the early motivation, you mentioned being bullied. You mentioned having a role model of manhood that came on the ship versus in your family. I wonder sometimes if we choose our meaning and purpose based on trauma, based on trying to correct the wrong that we think was done to us. What do you think about that? Because it seems to be a common story where some kind of trauma can then lead you on a path to trying to prove the opposite or try to reconstruct that trauma. What do you think about that?
Well, absolutely. And it can be good trauma and bad trauma. I think that the episode that I related from Vietnam, setting up that firing squad in the middle of this horrendous battle when it looked for sure I was going to be killed or captured, that finally broke me. That finally broke me. I remember sitting down, feeling my 45 in the holster, rubbing against my hip, and I think I cried. I think I wept in the middle of this battle, realizing that I had been going down a very dangerously wrong path for way too long. That was important. And at the United Nations, when I realized that I could almost single-handedly do things like help end apartheid, make the world a better place just by using who I was, my skills, my resources. I was big, I was tough, I was smart. I could put all that to use to making the world a better place. Well, that was a trauma in the other direction.
Yeah.
It was a huge revelation that I could be that powerful. And when I watch and see what I've been able to do every once in a while anyway, with a speech or with a blog piece or something the Giraffe Heroes Project has done, and I get feedback saying, "Oh my God, you changed my life. Oh my God, my community is completely different ever since you talked to us," or whatever. That's the same thing, only it's on the good side. So yeah, the answer to your question is, yeah, I think you got to put yourself out there and open yourself to pushers and shoves, some of which may be difficult and dangerous, some of which may not be, but you can't just wait for things to happen.
So many of us do wait for things to happen. We'll talk about being a creator of your life versus a consumer. And I think you're very much a creator of your own journey. And actually, there's one thing I wanted to ask you about, because one thing that also shines through your stories is somewhere along the line, you had this confidence or knowledge in your own power and agency, and whether it was becoming physically strong through the rowing and the climbing, or knowing that you could change the world at the UN, or knowing that you could make a difference, knowing that you could survive those terrible experiences, during war, you could walk through those things and add value. So what's the source of that? How did you know your power? Where did you find your power and agency?
That's a complex question. In the beginning, when I was doing all those physical risks, it was just one near miss after the other that foolishly convinced me that I was invulnerable.
Mm.
That it was my history of walking through all these hells and coming out the other side. Uh, and then the other part, was just like you're asking where courage comes from. And I think And this is what I tell people, this is what I teach, that a major path for courage is to go back to that question of meaning. If you're doing something you know is meaningful, okay, and you're applying everything you've got, your skills and your resources, to some tactic as a business person, as a violinist, as a barber, whatever, to make the world a better place, and you're doing all this, then the huge obstacles that are scaring you become more like speed bumps.
Uh-huh.
And that, I think, is what happens. Am I afraid? I'm afraid all the time. Jesus, I mean, I didn't know what would happen when I started showing those diplomats at the United Nations these documents about. I could have been jailed for doing that, and I really had thought that I was going to die in that lifeboat. And yeah, I was, of course, I was afraid. But as you pointed out, we both of us have pointed out, I think, in this conversation, that being afraid is natural. And if you're not afraid, I guess you're kind of like brain dead or something. I get scared all the time. But the question is moving past that. And if it's a really tough fear, then I go back to what I said earlier. I go back to taking the obstacle and turning it into a speed bump by focusing on what I know makes my life meaningful.
I love that speed bump analogy, this kind of journey, you keep moving forward, but these are just obstacles to navigate. In fact, let's talk a little bit about risk, because, I know you talk about in your Badass Grandpa TikToks about risk taking. Obviously, as you mentioned, I'm an ethics and compliance professional. As a lawyer and a compliance officer, a lot of what I do is try to mitigate risk. In fact, my survivor brain amplifies the survivor brain of others. It's like, don't take the risks. But I think what
Yeah.
I hear you saying is, no, do take the risks, but be thoughtful about that. And you've learned a lot, I think, through all these adventures, let's say, of how to take risks, calculated risks, and be prepared and thoughtful. So what do you say to our listeners about risk taking?
Yes, I guess half of my badass granddad episodes, I talk about that at the end because people ask the same question, and I basically start by saying, "Hey, look, I think I'm sorry, I'm repeating something that I've said on my other broadcast, but it's like I tell people like it's important to take risks because a life without risk is boring and ultimately inconsequential. I really believe that. But if you're going to take risks, I tell people, take smart risks and not stupid ones. A lot of my badass granddad episodes are about stupid risks, and I use those as teaching stories. But then I say, look, what does taking a smart risk entail? And I go through the things that I think are important. The first is just to be aware, to gain information. Don't head into something without knowing what the hell you're doing. So gain information about the risk, the risk and the risk environment that you're in. Second, you make a plan that's focused on who you are, your skills, your resources, your contacts. So you're aware, you do your homework, you make a plan, and then you assess the odds. Given that now that you know a lot more about the risk, given that you've made a plan that is as competent as you can make it, what are the odds? If the odds are still that you're going to get flattened, and it seems for sure, then maybe you shouldn't do it. But assess the odds fairly. And you'll probably find that, yeah, it's worth it. And then weigh the benefits against the losses. If in fact there's a significant loss entailed, then you better make sure that the benefit, if you succeed, is bigger than that loss. That's key, is to assess the benefits and do a cost benefit analysis. So those things I tell people are really important. And if you've done all of that, then lift up the corner of the rug you can lift up and do it. You may not succeed all the time, but if you are aware, you've done your homework, you've done your planning, you've assessed your own risks, you've assessed your own capabilities, you've assessed the cost-benefit analysis, then go for it.
No, that's beautiful. And again, very easily applicable to my corporate compliance work as well as daily life, to your point. I love that.
I'm sure you say very similar things talking to people. I mean,
Well, we're going to quote you now. We're going to quote you on it, John.
you've been doing this for how many years? I mean,
Oh, enough years, enough years. Maybe not as long as you, but a few years now.
so
Um,
the one thing you don't do is tell people never do stuff that scares you. Do that. Risk taking is an intrinsic part of living a successful life. So you need how to take risks. Listen to Hemma, listen to John, but listen to smart people who can coach you on taking those risks, but take them.
That's right. No, look, it's interesting you say that because I'm a parent, also a compliance officer, and I don't want to be the office of no or the office of block or the office of don't try that. I want to be able to unlock our human potential, unleash ourselves. And one of the framings I like to use is we need to step to the edge of possibility and see what else is out there, right? And you are the epitome of someone that steps to the edge of possibility, literally precipices in your life. I think you've said most heroes don't start with a master plan. They took one step. And that step is what changed everything. And so for somebody out there, our listeners that might be reticent, that they might think that you're different to them, how would you advise them to take that first step? What do they need to do to change their mindset and get to the edge of possibility?
I would say go back and look at, I'm sorry, I sound like a broken record here, but go back and look at what makes your life meaningful and do a good job of that. Go out and look at a starry sky, take a walk in the woods, talk to some trusted friends. Begin to look at what your entire life and what really makes it meaningful. I mean, if your whole life is about maximizing third quarter earnings for your company, and yet your whole life you wanted to be a saxophone player, that tells you something. Maybe there's a musical bent and you should pursue the rest of your life. But look at what's meaningful in your life and try to do something that meets it, because that's what turns those heavy duty risks into speed bumps. So that's the first thing I would tell people. Look at that and then assess who you are and then go for it. Understanding you may not succeed, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try it again.
That's right. Now, look, turning back to the Giraffe Heroes Project, I just love this analogy, the giraffe, the sticking your neck out, this neck stretch that we should be taking. When you look at the awardees, the people that whose stories you've elevated and amplified, what's the common thread or the through line with those people? What do you see in those people?
Most of them, when you say, why did you take the risk? They answer, well, no one else was doing it. So something had to be done. That polluted river was killing the kids or making the kids in our town sick. Or that corrupt labor leader was really screwing up the company or whatever. You need to look at the stuff. You need to look at it and then react to it. And that's really important.
Now, in my work, one of the things I know you've talked about this in some of your broadcasts is we try to encourage people to speak up when they see wrongdoing. So whistleblowers that see something, we want them to say something. We want them to provide decision useful information to each other, to their bosses, and if necessary, to the compliance team. What advice have you got for people that are worried about retaliation or not being believed or futility when they've got something important to share, but they just don't know how to do it in the corporate setting?
Yeah. Like that poor person in the Bureau of Labor Standards that got fired for telling the truth about the job numbers.
That's right.
You take the risk, and taking a risk does not mean you'll always succeed. You may take the risk of blowing the whistle, for example. We've now honored since 1982, we've honored at the Giraffe Heroes Project over 2,000 people. Each of them has taking risk, and you ask them why they take it. It's like I say, they've taken it because no one else was doing it, and someone had to do it, so they did. And it doesn't always succeed, and so you have to be prepared for failure. But if you do the kinds of things that create what I call smart risk as opposed to stupid ones, you're going to raise the odds of your success by a lot. And you're going to succeed a lot more than probably you think you have a right to succeed. If you're smart and you're tough and you've done your homework and you've done your planning and you've assessed the risks and benefits analysis and you've got the right contacts and you've got the right tools, then go for it. And you'll succeed a lot more than you'll fail. But if you fail, that just means that it was a risk. There's no risk if there's no possibility of failure, right?
Right. And
So,
failure is
yeah.
relative, isn't it, John? It's that we say failure, but you have to build the muscle. You have to try, right? And you don't know that actually what you've done isn't laying the foundation for someone to take the baton after you. I think there's this quote where they say, the true meaning of life is planting the seeds of trees whose shade you might never sit under, but you are planting those seeds for those that come after you. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, and I think a lot of the giraffes, you asked about what they feel, a lot of the giraffes feel the same thing too. They do something, they see it, the problem getting worse. They see a couple other people trying something, but they don't quite have the knack for it. They don't have the skills and they fail. And that doesn't mean that you're going to fail. You just look at that and then you develop your own plan and try and do a better job of it. And these giraffe heroes, again, if you ask them why they did it, as I said, the most common retort is, what the hell was I supposed to do? Now, a few of them have religious grounds for doing it. Oh, Jesus Christ made me do it. And that's fine. That's fine. Okay. But I'd say 95% don't have a religious basis. That's just what I said. There's a problem out there. No one else was solving it. People were suffering. I had to do something, so I did it.
I love
That's,
that. I love the
that's a
decisive
common
nature of
response.
that. Yeah,
That's
it's a
a common
decision.
response. Yeah.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Oh, well, John, I could speak to you for hours. Let me ask you one more question, then maybe just a quick wrap up. In terms of your legacy, what would you like your legacy to be?
Hmm. Hmm. I guess my legacy is as someone who has been a lifelong learner, who
Ah,
started off going the wrong way in a big time way, doing things that were shallow, even unethical, immoral, whatever, all because of motivations that were shallow, but who realized what was going on and at the halfway point, more or less, turned his life around. Yeah, I had the courage to turn my life around and then to move forward and to never look back.
John, may I thank you for your service in every sense of the word. There's so much you've done for us, and so many parts of your story has impacted others. Even in the earlier years, I can see how much impact you've had. This podcast is called Unless because of the
Yes,
quote from Dr. Zeus, the Lorax, who said, "Unless
yes.
someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not." So thank you for caring so much and building a life of service and then making sure others know the power of that too. We're so grateful to you, John.
I'm grateful for you hosting this podcast because you're asking wonderful questions. You're a great host, and I hope the two of us together have created a program that will make people think a little bit.
Yes, and may this be the beginning of something very beautiful. I'd love to collaborate with you more, John. Look, how can our listeners connect with you or learn more about Giraffe Heroes, your badass grandpa TikTok? How can they find you?
The Giraffe Project is a very simple URL. It's giraffe.org, GIRAFFE. A number of people don't know how to spell giraffe, Scott. And so giraffe.org, my own personal website is my name, johngraham.org. The book, as you've noted, is Quest. The subtitle is Risk, Adventure, and the Search for Meaning. TikTok, just go on there and go in their search box and look for badass granddad, badass all one word, and granddad with two D's in the middle. Oh, by the way, it's also very shortly going to be up on Instagram and YouTube. So it'll be up on those three channels. And yeah, I mean, you can, and also you can, people can email me. Especially on Badass Granddad, I spend, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours a week responding to people, and I'm happy to do it because a lot of people have really good questions. And my email is Graham, my name, at giraffe.org.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, you have the unique credential now of being the person that got me on TikTok because I did not have a TikTok account
Of
until I
course
met
not.
you.
How to say this politely, but people of your age don't go on TikTok.
I am now on TikTok. I have the book. I highly recommend the book. It's riveting. You will not be able to put it down. It's John is more than the modern day John Wayne. I mean, you certainly put your mark on history there. So thank you so much for the time today, John. Lovely to meet you, and we'll hopefully have you back to tell some more stories at some point.
Thank you. I got plenty more. Thank you for doing this. It's great.